This is the one from what they passed at town meeting.
Okay.
I looked at both wordings and I just took what I liked.
Okay, cool. I have a second question, but if I'm jumping the gun, then we'll put it aside for later. Looking at what's in green there,
Yep.
I do notice live without undue disturbance from noise. Obviously, I think solar panels don't make much noise. The clearing of trees gets rid of noise barriers from highways. So
Yeah.
would this suggest the screening needs to take into account that the highway is going to be louder in that person's backyard?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yep. Yes, and all the way along, make sure that the wording is appropriate, that they're talking about screening as not just visual, it's for noise as well. So
would that suggest perhaps that if you were to build, if you were wanting to put commercial solar on this plot of land, you might need to petition the state to put up noise walls the way they are along the Mass Pike and down in Newton? Otherwise, you won't get approval because you're not providing adequate screening?
I'm not, you're going to have to say that again if I didn't quite catch it.
I'll try again. If chopping down trees to put up solar panels means the highway that's a half mile away is going to be louder in my backyard, if they have to provide screening that accounts for lighting, signage, smoke, and noise from traffic, does that mean they have to devise a way to make sure that highway is not louder in my backyard? And maybe the best way to do that is get the state to put up noise barriers along 495. Is that what that screening law suggests?
I suppose it could be interpreted that way, but it also says without undue disturbance from. It doesn't say the noise level is going to be exactly the same.
And that's squishy language that the planning board can parse.
That's generally the way it's done, yeah. Okay, so you've all seen this wording before in red. And this is essentially our attempt at including the type of wording around public health, safety, and welfare, and talking about the clear cutting of trees, and the general. I'm not making any references to the view shed or anything like that because it's specifically been mentioned to us that doesn't matter to anybody illegally, but that sort of thing. So okay.
Yeah, if I may, Mary, what I like about that is that it puts the onus back up onto the Department of Energy Resources. And at town meeting, that the planning board and Zach and a lot of people won't have to defend it because it puts stuff in place and it's not local. Right. It's something that we don't have to defend.
I agree completely. Yeah, I think that strengthens our argument a lot. Again, don't know if it flies legally, but at least it strengthens it, in our eyes. So we've always gotten on applicability. We've always gotten lots of questions about the accessory use. And although this existing wording in plaque does say that it does not prevent the installation that are permitted as of right in any zoning district as an accessory use. It does say that, but it's confusing because it's kind of passive in the way it says it. And I was suggesting some additional wording, but that got into a little bit too much detail that was referencing other bylaws and so on. So what is in purple right now, solar arrays installed as accessory uses are not subject to the provisions of this article. It's just trying to state it much more directly. It's saying the same thing as in the sentence above it, but it's trying to say it more directly. So.
But Mary, if I may also now, yeah. I think that the green really should be brought up to the planning board and then maybe to the Board of Selectmen and see if there's anything we can do locally, and not because the state already does stuff and the feds already do stuff, but maybe there might be something we can do locally to encourage the accessory use so that the ground base may not be as necessary.
Yeah.
If we can just, there'll be something great to discuss. But again, more positive stuff that we come up with as opposed to just looking like we're anti-green is
absolutely
good.
Yeah, but it wouldn't be in this bylaw. That's the thing, because this bylaw doesn't deal with accessory use. So
I just bring it up for discussion, and
absolutely.
Because we might be able to take
I think that they would support that very much so, planning board in general. Yeah. So
Mary, just to add to that, I would say that solar arrays installed as accessory uses are not subject to the provisions of this article, but can be found in X article. Reference the place where you can find the accessory use. So someone can read this and go find out where that's applicable. Remember, this is something people are reading for guidance for where to put these things.
I know.
So it's like, if you
I don't believe they're referenced anywhere else in the bylaw.
I'm sorry, say again?
I don't believe they're referenced anywhere else in the bylaw.
I don't think they are either. I think, but they would be under the provisions of, just like, what would they be, they would still have to go through certain review.
I think just a building permit.
Just a building permit? Okay.
In certain situations, site plan review, like the one with First Congregational Church.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
When
okay.
parking lot.
Yeah, that's parking lot. Yeah.
So we could say, these, you could refer to the regulations for building permit, or what regulations would they go to? It's not a bylaw, but what regulations would they go to, John? If somebody were, yeah.
I mean, it really would be the building permit process.
Okay.
So then you would say, refer to the building inspector for guidance on that as an accessory use.
Okay.
Through the
Got
chair.
it. Yes, Sundar.
That line, I'm nitpicking here. That line says solar arrays installed. It almost seems to imply that already installed, previously installed. So that's not what we're saying, right? If I wish to install solar arrays as an accessory, this 210-201 doesn't cover that. I just want to, again, as I said, I'm nitpicking. Solar arrays installed, meaning that could be implied.
Maybe the word proposed instead.
Exactly. Yeah, thank you, John.
Good. Okay, no, thank you. I appreciate that. All right, now down into the use regulations. So this part in red that is shaded out is essentially what Brian and the rest of the town council has advised us will not fly in a lawsuit situation. So because we are singling out solar, unless we can come up with the reason why it is more of an issue for a solar development than for, a building or something along those lines. So I know you've all had a chance to at least think about this over the weekend, but do any of you have any thoughts on how to proceed?
If I could address the chair for a moment.
Yes, please go ahead.
Sure. So I think you would have a problem if you targeted this just at solar. Now that said, a possible option, and I don't know if you've considered it or whether it would be preferable or not, is to think for a moment about the harm. If the harm is that there's disturbed land under whatever definition that you may come up with, you may consider asking us to try to develop a bylaw that isn't specific to solar, but covers all types of developments in the town. So in other words, again, I'll go back to clear cutting trees because that's the easiest one for me to envision, but I understand that you guys may have a broader definition of disturbances. But if you were to come up with a bylaw that wasn't specific to solar, but just said, look, on a parcel that's bigger than 3 acres, bigger than 5 acres, whatever your pleasure. There's these standards on clearing trees on all types of developments in the town. We think that there may be some room to work there, because now you're not specific to solar. You're addressing a harm that you've identified as being detrimental to the town and that potentially is reasonable. Now, I'm just discussing this in general. We've looked, in preparation for this meeting, we sort of took a look at other just tree bylaws on that issue in other towns, and we didn't see anything that was quite on all fours. But if that's, I guess, I suppose, one potential tool that would be available to you that town council's office would be willing to take a look at and research, if that's something you want us to do. Now, I don't know exactly what your objectives are here, but I just wanted to throw that out there as a possibility.
Thanks, Brian.
To the chair.
Yes, Ted.
So, Brian, my answer is I would love for you to look into that, but our zoning advisory committee time is kind of up today. So I would ask if Mary and Sundar would be interested in having the planning board continue to pursue that option through Brian and town council, because we are kind of out of time.
We are. Yeah. And
yeah, if I could address the chair again.
Yeah.
Oh, I was going to say,
ahead.
we could do that. The other option, I have no idea, what your pleasure is. We could do that relatively quickly. And if you wanted to have another meeting, say next week, we would be willing to do that on an expedited time frame. Or we can go to the planning board. Again, it's entirely up to you, but I just want to let you know that we would certainly prioritize an ask like that if it would be preferable to you to get sort of another crack at it before it goes to the planning board.
Thank you.
Through the chair, I had a question.
Go ahead.
So, Mr. Bertram, in the situation that you're proposing, wouldn't far more bylaws than just the solar bylaw that we're discussing get impacted? Because essentially, wouldn't we say anything for a commercial construction or, as you said, playground? Wouldn't we be touching a lot more? I mean, scope creep, that's the word which comes to mind. Mm-hmm. What is the positives and negatives out of that, given that, would that mean all of those would end up essentially getting reviewed, not just by planning board, but then also at town meeting? I mean, would we inadvertently introduce a lot more to be done by the town members?
Yeah, in short, you would be touching on a lot more, and that would, sort of be the argument in terms of its defensibility, right? I would recommend probably if you were to go down that path, that if the concern is sort of large developments, then you would, put some text in there that would say that the development would have to be larger than a certain size to reduce the amount of things that you're sweeping in. But there's no doubt in thinking about that and weighing the pros and cons, you'd have to think about the fact that, you would sweep in anything that would be that size, whether it be a residential development. I don't know if there's a 5-acre playground out there, but, there could certainly be some other kind of development, and there would certainly be consequences for that. Now, the type of review or anything else that would involve would be entirely up to you, because now, we're out of the commercial solar world, and it would simply be really a new bylaw where we're saying, okay, we have these specific concerns, whether it's clearing trees or disturbing land. And the question would be, the harm is, well, we're losing trees, we're losing natural habitat. So how do we best combat that? And it would be up to you to come up with sort of the safeguards against that, and come up with the standards that you think would best serve Hopkinton, not only in dealing with the commercial installations, but everything else that might be swept in. So it would certainly, it would be new. I haven't seen something that's necessarily quite like that, but it doesn't mean it can't be done if it's the path you want to go down. Because otherwise, I think it's difficult to do this just for commercial solar installations, because when we kicked it around internally, we had a really hard time coming up with, again, harms that, apply only to commercial installations as opposed to all other installations when we have this concern.
So the way I look at it is when something is clear cut for solar, there's a lot more trees cut because, of course, trees shade the solar panels. Usually there are trees left or replanted around a house or around a building. Usually there's a lot more buffer trees left at the outskirts of a lot. In addition, particularly say if it's a house or a building, there's trees within the lot and interspersed rather than entirely flat out, no trees. So it is different to me. And I just don't know that that's legally defensible, but it's a very different situation to me when somebody is preparing a lot for construction of a building versus preparing a lot for construction of solar and what it does to the environment there. Is there anything we can work with that?
Well, again, it sounds to me like it's the degree to which the land is being cleared. And I know, today the issue is solar installations, and they sort of cause that harm in a way that probably is more expensive than a residential development because, everybody, most people at least, like trees around their houses. They like to see the green in their neighborhoods, things like that. But tomorrow it could be a different type of installation, or, again, I come back to a farm if it's not a silviculture, issue, and instead, a farm that needs to clear cut land. You could cause the same kind of harm. So, a more generally applicable zoning bylaw might want to focus on the degree to which the clearing of the vegetation, whether it be trees or something else, how extensive it is, or put standards around that, which they would be neutral on their face and generally applicable to whatever came in, but they may forestall some of the harm that you see because solar installations tend to need more cutting than, say, a large residential development. Again, this, they would probably take some work to construct this. I see you have another hand up, so I'll stop.
Go ahead, Rhea.
I look at large solar farms as a commercial business. And I'm wondering whether or not we can restrict it to a specific business zone within our town, plus layer in no more than 3 acres kind of a requirement, because the fact that this could be on a big agricultural piece of land that just doesn't have a designated use today, because I'm looking at the bylaws for what's allowed in agricultural, and it really lends itself more to residential as an evolution. Is that an angle we should be looking at, Brian?
So in terms of restricting it, we're essentially talking about, I think, what was tabled at last town meeting, which is some form of an overlay district. Is that?
No, just talking about being allowed in a specific commercial zone. So whether it's industrial B or, being very specific to a zone that instead of trying to, because I do believe, even though I would love no clear cutting of trees in town, I think that that's going to be a much larger issue on a whole lot of levels to get past at town meeting. So, I mean, we can work on that for next year, but I think that this thing is so immediate, and our need is so immediate to fix this immediately. So.
Okay, so you're talking about the existing zoning map. Okay. Well, I'm going to preface this by saying the answer is probably not going to be that satisfying. It's certainly not satisfying to me, but the answer is I just don't know. And let me explain a little bit of the existing law, which is there really isn't that much. There have been, I think, 3 land court decisions now that have either directly or indirectly grappled with the idea of either creating an overlay district or restricting commercial solar installations to certain districts and not other districts. And, the results and the outcomes are kind of decidedly mixed. The most recent decision was in 2019. It's sort of an odd decision in that there wasn't sort of a written decision that I can forward to you guys, but I can certainly email. It was entered on the docket as a rationale by the Chief Justice of the Land Court, and he basically rejected the idea altogether that one can prohibit commercial solar in some districts and allow it in others. Now, the discussion that he gave did acknowledge that there's at least one other land court decision that seems to suggest something different. And so where we're left is we've had several judges in the land court directly or indirectly weigh in on this to different results. And as a lawyer, what I can tell you is that none of those bind you or any other court. They're what we call unprecedential because they're trial court decisions. And so what we really would love is a decision by an appellate court that would be binding on the lower judges. But this is where it gets unsatisfying. We don't have that. And so, the reason that we gave the advice during the last town meeting cycle that we did, which was, we're not really sure, but if you do it, the more land that's in the overlay district, or I suppose the more zoning districts that you allow, the better, is because, we're not entirely confident that if the courts were to address the issue, they'd uphold it even on the general principle. But if they did, the more you allow, the more reasonable. So I'm not going to tell you you can't take that as an approach, but you do it with some peril that, a land court judge, or if it gets to an appellate level, they would tell you, well, you can't do this at all. And even if you clear that hurdle, then you have to be careful that you allow this in enough of the town that any reviewing judge is going to say this is reasonable, and that there's a principle for allowing it in certain districts and not others based on the characteristics of these facilities. And if memory serves, Hopkinton's zoning map, arising from your largely agrarian past, I think at least half of the town, if not more, is still agriculturally zoned. And I don't think that the commercial or the industrial zones are that large a portion of your town. So again, I'm sorry it's unsatisfying, but that's the best I can do.
Do we have any percentages of our commercial versus our agricultural and residential?
No, I don't have any percentages, but Brian is pretty accurate. The agricultural zone makes up, I would also guess, about 50% of the town. Industrial B is not large at all. It's just Harvey's transfer station, a portion of over by West Elm, and then I want to say there's like one more section that's not very big, and that would be the Industrial B. Industrial A is on South Street. So if you're looking at the eastern half of town, I don't even think there's any industrial district over there.
Hey, Mary, if we did restrict it to, say, Industrial B, that would require, if someone didn't have a parcel that was presently zoned Industrial B, that they would have to petition to rezone to that industrial district in order to install a commercial solar installation. Would that be a path we could take if we restrict it to one zone? I mean, the other question I had was, is there a utility use that's restricted to different zones in the area? If you wanted to come in and put in a substation, does it need to be in a particular zone, or does it, whatever you put it, need to be rezoned to an industrial district or a commercial district? Or, I mean, this is basically a utility installation. It just dawned on me that, do we have something that specifies where utility installations can go?
Well, I think that question was to me. I seem to be the man of the hour here, so.
or John, concerning what's allowed in the zoning.
Yeah.
So I can answer the utility thing. No, we don't restrict utilities in any district. However, I would not consider this a utility. This is a commercial solar photovoltaic installation. While it does generate electricity, I don't know if it could meet the definition of a utility. since it's privately owned. I don't think any of these companies would really be utility companies.
Yeah, and I would add to that, to our eternal frustration, a lot of times when you get a true energy facility that comes in, they get zoning exemptions from the state anyway to go wherever they want. So I'm not sure. I appreciate this sort of common sense logic of it. Unfortunately, the state and the way it decides to regulate doesn't really invoke common sense all the time. I think to your other question on just doing it in industrial B, that gets back to sort of the issue of the previous overlay district where there just wasn't a lot of land that was sort of set aside. And while you can always, I suppose, ask for it to be rezoned, I would really, really caution you that I think that just restricting it to that small of an area would not be viewed as reasonable. I mean, at the end of the day, we are barred from prohibiting these facilities by statute. And the argument that we're not, prohibiting them would be, well, if we allow them in some, districts, even if they're, I suppose, technically prohibited in others, it's really just a form of regulation. But in terms of controlling, the narrative and advancing a legal argument, I think it's, even if you win on that, it would be difficult to convince a judge that what you're doing is reasonable when the allowable land area under your bylaw, absent some form of, change to the zoning, is only a small portion of town. I would encourage you to either bring in more land if you want to go that path with, sort of the issues that I raised before, or try to come up with alternative means to deal with the issues.
Rachel, you've been waiting a while. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Mary. I was looking back over our notes about that we need to maintain, safeguard public health and welfare. And I guess my feeling slowly over time about a commercial solar versus a commercial building is that it's just a structure. It's not people, right? When you have residential development, when you have commercial development, it's a people and a business. And so I wonder if there's some way to say that that this type of development hurts the town's welfare. Again, I don't know from a tax perspective if the town gets less revenue from a commercial solar versus a commercial business, but I mean, in terms of the welfare, I feel like the other kinds of development bring in not just buildings, but people and life and activity to the town. And I feel that commercial solar, it's just like having a, just a machine sitting somewhere. That makes any sense.
It does. Yes.
But I wonder if in terms of the welfare of the town, is the welfare, the tax base of the town hurt by having a commercial solar versus a regular commercial building?
I'm through Mary.
Yeah.
What about if we add industrial A to industrial B? Because we really don't have a lot of business districts, but that seems to be the most appropriate place to put something like this if it's financially feasible. You see, I think our industrial areas are more valuable than have a solar farm, but so I think that would filter itself out. Does that make sense?
I think so. I do think that would increase the area. There have been, we discussed that before though, and there were strong arguments against, because essentially what Rachel was just saying, that having businesses come to town, it's much more valuable for the town than a ground-mounted solar on that same land. So.
Right, but a developer would look at the value of the land higher with the business there than with the solar panel. So the marketplace would dictate how this would be used.
And it would drive them more toward accessory use.
Right. So, I mean, I'm just thinking, that may be an approach, but John and Brian have to tell us that industrial A and B together would be enough land to support the argument in an appellate court. Yeah.
So, Madam Chair, 2 points, if I may. The first is, can I share the zoning map? Because I think that might be helpful for this discussion to see.
Yes.
The second is, I know we talked about rezoning land for solar in the future, if it were industrial B, but there's also the opportunity, if I understand this correctly, I think Hopkinton allows for use variances as well. So they could petition the ZBA for a use variance for solar, and that might open a whole other can of worms that I don't know if we want to get into. But I will share the zoning map right now. So the purple is industrial B, and the light purpley pink is industrial A.
Yeah, I would think that the solar installation would be much more considered an industrial installation. Or when you think about commercial, you've got a store, you've got a nice building that people are looking at. This is a structure with panels hung on it. It would be like saying, I want to put a cement mixer off of Main Street. I mean, it's not something that's going to be aesthetically pleasing. And I think that's kind of why some of the industrial districts were set up, because they're kind of set back from residential areas and view. And so if we could drive these into an industrial zoning, and then if they decide they want to take one of these ag areas and develop it as a commercial solar, then they need to show us why it would be an ideal industrial area and rezone it to industrial B and go ahead with their installation. Or industrial A.
Through the chair.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I wonder if Brian, looking at our zoning map, has a thought on combining A and B and whether that is still potentially too restrictive.
It's not a lot of land. I mean, look, I'm going to preface this again by saying, a lot of this is totally by gut, right? Because we don't have any guidance on this. So I apologize, but that's the best I can do. But well,
and then while Brian's thinking, I'll just throw this out. And honestly, John, I quickly looked at my phone. I missed the end of your last comment, so you may have said this. If Brian says that A and B might be doable, the trade-off is we're now allowing a type of commercial activity in B that town meeting 2 years ago said they didn't want, which is not many jobs created, not a whole lot of tax revenue, because it's not the kind of businesses that we wanted to say, that we wanted in industrial B. And town meeting agreed with that sentiment in 2018, question mark. So if Brian says that A and B is a potential answer to our solar issue we're trying to study, we are trading off that it would be hard then to say we don't want storage facilities in industrial B if we're allowing solar in industrial B. So that's a trade-off to keep in mind if that's a route that's even possible.
At least for the argument at town meeting. Yeah, I agree completely. But as Ria pointed out a little bit ago, the likelihood that somebody would want to use the land in industrial A is they'd probably be driven more toward accessory use of solar rather than ground mounted solar.
But we know for sure that people would like to put storage facilities and car washes, because those are the issues that came up.
Yes.
And it would be hard to mount an argument against those, which town meeting told us they didn't want, if we allowed solar in that area.
So I'm eyeballing it, and I really don't think the 2 industrial areas would be enough. Again, I can't point you to any court decision that gives you a rule of thumb, but in knowing the types of other facilities that are included in the list of sort of uses that are in 40A Section 3 and the way they're treated, I would think you'd be hard pressed to defend just putting it in those industrial districts. Now, I would say that in just discussing that, I heard sort of specific concerns come up, like visual or something else. And I would certainly encourage you, if you think that the facilities that have gone in to date have not been adequately treated as to visual impacts, I saw your past, I thought pretty thoughtful, actually suggested revisions to the bylaw about glare, about sight lines, about things like that. Those are the types of measures you could propose to town meeting that we would much more readily think would clear any kind of legal review, that could address a lot of the same concerns. I mean, now those obviously don't address the concern of, clear cutting or losing the natural state of land, but this may well end up being that you have multiple problems here that you're trying to address, and you may need multiple solutions. So, I would encourage you, if it's visual or something like that, even, maybe to think less about maybe, restricting it to certain districts, which might be hard with our zoning map, and more about returning to, again, when we looked at it this week, thought was some pretty well researched and thoughtful amendments that you might do to your existing bylaw.
So I would like to get Brian and Ethan's take on limiting the size. So if we were to say, on a lot containing a maximum of 3 acres or 5 acres or whatever. So limiting the size of solar arrays. Do you think that's justifiable? Or what would it take to make it justifiable?
I think it's sort of Ethan can jump in if I'm getting it wrong, but I think that the analysis is sort of similar to the other provision that we had. If you're not restricting other types of large installations the same way, I would be uncomfortable with that because, again, we're sort of treating them differently, and it's more because we don't like them rather than addressing the specific harm that may be caused from a large installation in general.
Okay. John, can I share my screen again? Okay. So just looking at the green wording and this one that I sent to the ZAC members earlier before the weekend. So these are the screening types of things, and this is all in the use regulations. Okay, so again, I borrowed this wording from several different places, modified it somewhat from time to time, but essentially in part C, just saying that setback areas should not be, modified except for, getting the vehicular access roads in and out. But other than that, only modified for additional screening. So clarifying that. But the biggest change is probably in section E to take out the whenever reasonable, first of all, because that just seems like this big question mark. I think that these types of screening should be all the time, always maintained year round. So solar panels supporting structures and appurtenances shall be effectively screened year round from all abutting properties and from public and private ways in all residential districts. The public and private ways in all residential districts specifically was from that Athol bylaw. abutting properties I highlighted because we had previously talked about it not being just the direct abutters, but being the neighbors of the neighbors if the facility is visible. So that's something we might want to work on the wording too. So the methods such as landscaping, natural features, earthen berms, and fencing, that was from the previous wording. But then the design of the installation shall prevent reflected solar radiation or glare from becoming a public nuisance or hazard to adjacent buildings, roadways, or properties. Design efforts may include but not be limited to deliberate placement and arrangement of solar panels on the site, anti-reflective materials, and additional screening. A visual impact assessment shall be conducted and presented to the board. Actually, I think you reworded that slightly, John. I don't know if this is the reworded version. I apologize. Including analyses such as renderings, line of sight studies, and/or visualizations. When reviewing the application for compliance with this article, the planning board shall make a definitive judgment as to whether the intent has been achieved with regard to visual impact. That last sentence seemed like a really good thing that you'd have to require the planning board to specifically say. But I don't know if it's something that we typically would have in our bylaws. So it's from that other bylaw.
Through the chair.
Yes, go ahead.
I don't know if such a thing exists, but can we get an audio impact assessment as well?
There was some wording in the Athol bylaw, and I can pull that up. But yes, that is a possibility.
If it seems like legally this is our best way, I would love to make sure that we are considering as many different impacts as we possibly can. And I absolutely want the audio impacts included.
Yeah, at the time that I inserted this wording, it was assumed that this was still part of that that option too that we thought we had, which was the previously disturbed land only. Beefing this up additionally, since it looks like we can't include that at all, I think would be definitely a good idea.
Certainly in my conversations with the residents of Alexander Road, they've mentioned how much louder the highway is since that solar farm went in. So that's feedback we're getting from people who've been impacted by commercial solar development.
Okay. So John, if you could read paragraph F while I look up that other information. I know I have it somewhere.
All right, so paragraph F says the area of the site cleared as part of the solar array installation, including the areas under and surrounding the solar panels, shall be seeded with a pollinator seed mix and maintained as bird and insect habitat. Mowing is to be undertaken when necessary for maintenance of the array. Alternative vegetation or cover options may be proposed by the applicant in consideration of soil type and quality, subject to approval of the planning board.
Okay. And just in general, this is something that every solar situation that I've been on the board for, we have brought up, and it has become part of the conditions. So it is already being done, but I think it's a good idea to include it in the bylaw, and then it will always automatically be done rather than having somebody remember to bring it up. Any comments on that? Okay. And then there wasn't anything about herbicides, pesticides, and synthetic fertilizers not being used. Again, it's something that is currently always brought up by some member of the planning board and put in the conditions. But again, this is, I think it's important to have it in the bylaw to ensure that it doesn't get forgotten. And then finally, well, there's nothing in the administration, but in the discontinuance, added some wording about the stabilize and revegetate the site as necessary to minimize erosion and sedimentation is the only part that was there before. And I know it has been discussed in the planning board before, but I know it is also not consistently conditioned in a way to ensure that, and again, we have never had any discontinuation of this, but when we get there, thinking of the future Hopkinton, when a site is discontinued, that it is not just reseeded with some pollinator mix but that there's some real trees and shrubs put in that is consistent with the area prior to that solar farm being there. So I don't know if, how people feel about that, but that's something that that stuck out to me as something that needed to be done.
Can you have them submit a planning plan of some type for approval?
There is in the, you mean in the discontinuance section or
wherever we're going to regulate what they can do with it after they pull up stakes?
Okay. Yeah, it would be in the discontinuance section then. So a plan, okay, so.
I don't know if I call it a landscape plan because that's typically
for the approval.
Than
yeah, is that something, a landscaping plan for approval by a board? Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, that's kind of what I was.
Okay. John, do you have any thoughts on who would be the board or official in charge of that? What would be appropriate?
So let me get this straight. It would be a landscaping plan submitted at the approval time for the discontinuation of the site.
No, they'd have to do it at the discontinuation time.
So it would basically be a requirement that prior to discontinuation, they would have to submit a landscaping plan to revegetate the site. Correct?
Yeah,
I think that's what Curtis was suggesting.
Yeah. So I mean, if there's a board that would do it, it would be the planning board. The planning board is kind of the overseer of all the things. My concern is in cases of discontinuation because perhaps the developer just abandons the property, that burden would fall on the town to then prepare that plan, which could be covered in the discontinuation or decommissioning fees, but it's just something to consider. And if you're looking at 25 years down the road, and if the project has changed hands a couple times, you're probably not dealing with the same developer that actually got the permit in the first place. And so there might be a lack of knowledge as to what the site was like before that. And other issues that would go along with that. Plus, you'll probably be dealing with a new planning board 3 times, 4 times over at that point.
Does the permit stay with the property or with the permittee? If, all of a sudden development came in and proposed this, built it, and then they wanted to sell it to, Bright Skies or whatever, would they have to transfer that permit to where they're still responsible for everything the original developer was, or do they surely they can't just abandon it and, lose all of their responsibilities at that point?
Yeah, so as far as I know, and I could be wrong, the permit goes with the permittee. The issue would be, and not that they would abandon, they would abandon it. I'm thinking if the company went bankrupt and they were no longer a company. In that situation, that's what the decommissioning fees are for, right? In those situations where the developer or the solar owner would not be taking the solar array down. So in that situation, the town has that money to do that, but that would also then have to include preparing a plan and the research and all that kind of stuff. I'm not saying it's a huge cost. It's just one more thing that I think should be addressed at the issuance of the permit rather than letting it happen 25 years, 50 years later.
Yeah, there's no reason they couldn't prepare a plan and have it in the file for,
right.
It would be restored. And typically in development, if you come in and build an office building and you get an approved landscape plan, you plan all your landscaping, you have to guarantee that planting for a period of time to stay alive, so you don't plant something that dies the next year and don't have to come back and do it. I don't know if there would need to be any follow-up.
There is wording on that for the lifetime of the array, but then for the landscaping done after the fact, there we need to probably have something for that.
Yeah, it sounds like you guys are thinking along the lines of a decommissioning plan. You'd see that with larger facilities, to remove the structures and return the land to whatever state you want, and having some kind of, requirement that there's a plan in place at the time the permit issues, for what happens once the useful life of the facility ends.
Yeah, along with that decommissioning plan, you could include the restoration, include any kind of bonds that were collected at the time of.
Okay. All right, good. So I found something regarding the noise control, and it has to do with documentation by an acoustical engineer of the noise levels before they don't have the exact wording we'd need, but documentation by an acoustical engineer of noise levels is what we're thinking about here. So we'd need to craft some wording around that. So don't know if that would be in this screening. So this is the visual impact screening also for.
With recommendations to reduce or eliminate noise.
Okay.
I don't know if we could reference emanating from the site or across the site. In the case of the highway, the noise that you're abating may not be coming from your development. It's right. You're just taking away screening from, because typically with a commercial or industrial development, you may take down a lot of the trees, but you're also putting up a giant building that's blocking a lot of the travel of the sound. Whereas these things are, 7 or 8 feet above the ground, and
Madam Chair, Ron raised his hand. I don't know if he still has something to say.
Go ahead, Ron.
Mayor, I just wanted to go back to the use regulations part A. The last sentence in there is referencing that they're exempt for previously disturbed land set forth above, and the above has gone away.
Yeah.
So we want
Yeah,
to
I'd have to delete all of this.
Yeah, all right. Thank you.
Sure thing. So essentially, we're still talking about a minimum of 3 acres for the commercial. So no change to the bylaw on that. And we would at least for option 2 here, we'd be making all of our changes to these other uses, other aspects of the use regulations. So screening, setbacks, and including the visual impact assessment, line of sight studies. Does line of sight studies accurately portray what Curtis had shown us, the screening elevations, or do we need to add wording to get the right terminology there, John?
So I think I'm a little confused now. Is what the document in front of us now is does that include the what do we call option 4, where it was kind of the rewrite? Because that included a whole bunch of.
Yeah, that did include a whole lot more. What I was doing here for option 2, when we, you could call that this is the combination of option 2 and option 4. Yeah, at this point. But I did not, I was trying to add, at the time, trying to add limited screening changes to this bylaw. So it sounds like we might want to work on combining 2 and 4, taking the best parts of each, and then going from there.
That's what I was going to say, because option 4 really kind of went into detail as to what those studies entailed, the things that were required, part of the submission. And it just kind of had a lot more detail that I think was pretty well worded. And I know town council looked at that, and that's what they were talking about with the glare and the sight lines. And I think if we could take that as much as possible and add it to this and make some minor changes, that might be the best way forward if that's what we're trying to do, because it's already written.
Yeah, if I could address the chair for a moment, I would agree with John. I mean, we can't help but tinker with text. It's sort of in our nature. So we would have some non-substantive textual suggestions for it. But in terms of the substance of those provisions, again, you commend you on your research and your thoroughness in those. I thought you guys did a pretty good job with them.
So if there's anything that you would like to add to that other one, I think that's probably going to be more efficient than trying to take that text and add it to option 2, if that makes any sense.
Yes, it does. And yes, I think there probably are some things that we would need to look at. I'm just trying to figure out where it is and pull it up.
So I sent it to town council in an email, and you were copied on that. So that might be the most
I know.
efficient way. I can pull it up if you'd like me to.
Yeah, go ahead.
Again, for clarity, are we talking about the Tufts study now?
It was the changes that we made. It was, I think we called it the rewrite.
The soup to nuts rewrite.
But that included taking a lot of the Tufts stuff, right?
Correct.
Yeah. I believe it did.
All right, I gotta find it.
While we're doing this, I'd just like to reaffirm, and I don't know if anyone is with me, I would still love town council to weigh in with the planning board, or if we fit in one meeting next week, about clear cutting and what options we have with regulating that. I don't want to lose that. I know we can't do anything tonight. But...
Whatever your pleasure, we're happy to help.
I agree, Ron. Ted, I'm sorry. I agree, Ted, with that suggestion. And I think that even though I don't think it's particularly viable to go to town meeting with something like that, I think that planning board should have that option to look at.
So one question I had for town council is if there were to be a tree bylaw, would that be a general bylaw or would that be included in the zoning bylaw? Because
we've seen it in both. So I'm not sure there's a clear answer. I can tell you the general laws don't, specifically contemplate this type of bylaw, but we have seen it in both areas. So in terms of researching it and thinking about it, that'd be one of the things we'd be thinking about. But the fact that, at least, I forget what town it was, but we've seen it in at least one other town zoning bylaws. So, to the extent this committee recommends zoning bylaw changes, that's a good sign.
The only reason I say this is because a zoning bylaw is going to be 2/3 majority, a general bylaw is going to be simple majorities, and that might be easier for town meeting to pass if that's something.
That's true too.
That is true.
It will be one of the issues we look into with those. We've, like I said, we wanted to get some direction from you guys. We did do some preliminary looking around, and like I said, we didn't find one that was sort of on all fours with your situation and what you were trying to accomplish. But we did see some examples, but there were also some issues with those. So we would want to think carefully about it, which is, the reason why I don't have sort of a fully formed proposal for you tonight. And I wanted to get a little direction if you wanted us to go forward with it.
Wanted to mention the Village of Libertyville and Illinois code. I brought it before, is part of the municipal code. So it's not a zoning.
I certainly think.
And the tree protection bylaw we have right now, which is very limited in scope, of course, but that is also a general bylaw, right?
I think so.
Yeah.
I certainly think with the town's general feelings about development in recent years, that a clear-cutting bylaw that might impact and help shape subdivisions would be received well at town meeting, in addition to its impacts on commercial solar development.
Okay. Can you page down, John? Okay, visual impact, sightline representation, sightlines illustrated. Okay. Yep. Okay. And the lighting, I don't think this is necessary in the lighting. I really don't, because there's no lighting in the solar arrays. So. Anybody chime in if you don't agree with me?
Yeah, there might be lighting around a solar array for to discourage nightlife in that area or for maintenance. So I don't know if I would just unilaterally just get rid of lighting, but
no, the lighting wording that exists in black stays.
Oh, okay.
It's just the added wording. That's all I'm saying. Sorry. We're not talking about deleting anything from the bylaw. Okay. Okay, installation shall be designed and constructed to protect wildlife and trail corridors. So, and that's fine, because again, this is something that's usually talked about in the planning board approval process, but it's good to have it in the bylaw itself. Landscape plan and erosion and sedimentation control. Land that is agricultural use. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if all of this is necessary, because I did go through this and when I was trying to decide what limited things to add, but Well, what do you think, John? Do you
So I think the in terms of item K, I think it goes to what Ted had heard from Matt Verrill.
Yeah.
You know, it may be limited that active agricultural uses are being used for solar, but in the instance where a historically agricultural parcel is used, this would be beneficial for the future should Massachusetts decide that they need to have more agricultural land. And this kind of preserves any land that would be there. So it may be limited in applicability, but I don't think it's too much.
Okay, fair enough. We should add chemical fertilizers or synthetic fertilizers or whatever the case to the hazardous materials. It says no pesticides or defoliants, but we should add no chemical fertilizers.
So this hazardous materials section was an issue for town council, and I'll let Brian speak to that.
Yeah, I guess I'm not entirely sure if it's an issue. My question is the concern that we're getting at here. I mean, I can certainly envision that some hazardous materials would be used at this facility, but if I recall the zoning bylaw correctly, we don't really, for other sort of large installations, we don't really have hazardous materials regulation in our bylaws unless you're in a water protection resources overlay district or something along those lines. And so the sort of pause that gave me is that if we're not putting these types of conditions or provisions on other types of facilities, and a concrete example would be Hopkinton LNG facility, which may have many more hazardous materials, then we may put ourselves in a similar situation as clear cutting. Now, that said, I feel a lot less strongly about this provision than I did about the clear cutting. But I guess I was just a little curious about the specific concerns we had about hazardous materials at these types of installations. And I wanted to make sure that, we had sort of particular concerns that were particular to commercial solar.
Okay, first of all, for the LNG facility, it seems like we do have a lot of discussions with them about hazardous materials.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of laws and other things that govern them, but I'm just not sure that there's anything specific in the zoning bylaws.
Perhaps not in the zoning bylaws.
Yeah.
And that's probably, the difference between the way other towns might write their bylaws and in borrowing it into this, because I don't think that this is necessarily required, because I think it is covered elsewhere in our overall, the review of stormwater runoff and things like that. And, we have it covered elsewhere. We don't write it into every single bylaw because we don't need to. We have it someplace else in the bylaws. So that's my sense of it in general. But any other thoughts on this, anyone?
I have a quick thought, Mary, because now I'm getting confused between looking at this document and what we were looking at before with the green print.
Yeah.
So long as the herbicide thing stays, because I do think that's specific to solar, because they don't want plants to grow over the panels.
I agree.
I wouldn't want to lose the herbicides part of this, even
and that's
if the rest of hazardous materials is covered somewhere else.
That's why I put it in the other section on screening.
And that's what I'm saying. I was just confused if that's a document we're not working from anymore. So long as herbicides, no use of herbicides is in there somewhere, that satisfies me for that part.
So, Madam Chair, one thing that I was thinking, just looking at this, is if this were to change to section 210-205 pesticides and herbicides, you can basically take this first sentence out, maybe, or change the introductory paragraph a little bit, and then take the fourth item out, and you really don't have to change much, because the other three theoretically involve pesticides and herbicides.
I love having John Gelsich with us.
That sounds fine to me, John. So I'm simultaneously, as we're doing this, trying to figure out what we vote on tonight, if anything, and whether or not we since we're rewriting on the fly, whether or not we try to schedule a special meeting in the next week or so.
Well, for the chair, if it's helpful to that calculus, if you do schedule a special meeting for next week and you want written comments from us, I think that's a deadline we could hit if you sent to us a draft you marked up tonight. Again, it's entirely up to you, but if you think that would be helpful, we could do that to support the effort.
Okay, thank you. And we have a planning board meeting next week. No, we don't have a planning board. Oh, thank God. because of the silly holiday. Thank goodness. Okay.
That's right.
So theoretically, we could meet, later this week or sometime next week, other than Monday, and review a final wording. I would feel much more comfortable than voting on, what we've been discussing tonight. Letting John and me work on the draft, the changes, making sure that the other things we talked about when we were on that other version get included in this more extensive version. I went through our options to vote, from the last meeting, and it looks like all of them except this option, this long, much more involved option. All of the options have been pretty much nixed by legal. So I know this is your job, right?
I'm sorry, but that's why I volunteered to be here. I want to be something more than just the Department of No.
Yeah. So it looks like, we're down to just this. And so I think that all of us would like to be able to look at the wording one more time, make any changes that we think are appropriate, and have legal take a look at it again, of course, and be pretty comfortable with the option that we're presenting to planning board.
And if I may, if Brian thinks he could put it together, hear about a tree cutting bylaw.
Yep.
Or any other bylaw from another town that we could, use.
Absolutely.
We can certainly look. I be honest with you, I've read a number of these now, just with this is an important issue in Hopkinton. It's come up a number of times and has forced me to look at bylaws a number of times. And if we had seen a lot of great options that you all weren't coming up with, we probably would have already zoomed in on them. We can take another look, but I wouldn't hold out hope that there's too many better solutions out there that others have done. You all have done a pretty good job of identifying those for yourselves already.
Well, I would say Mary did a lot of the writing. I appreciate her detail because I knew that this was a difficult one because of all of the angles we had to think about. And there's a lot of detail in what you did. Thank you, Mary.
You're welcome. I plagiarized a lot, but thank you. Rachel?
Mary, I was just reading through the solar regulations again, and there's a section in there about soil and water conservation and avoiding negative impact to soil and water, or stimulating erosion or water runoff conditions. So do you think some of this hazardous material could fall under that? I mean, some of this is about pesticides and herbicides, but I think some of those other areas might fall under the regular regulation.
John, I don't know if it's in this section, but is there another section that talks about runoff, or is that all in the stormwater regulations that are separate from this bylaw?
So it's all in the stormwater regulations, but I think that brings up a good point that I was going to bring up and completely forgot about. And that town council brought up that we kind of don't understand why, but should we get rid of this provision, which will require them to go through site plan review, which will require them to go through a more rigorous analysis of the stormwater runoff and the things that Rachel is talking about, rather than kind of trying to capture it in this process. Both Brian and I don't know why this was included originally. So if anyone's aware of the reasons, that would be helpful.
I'm not aware, and I'd love to get rid of it.
I'd love to get rid of it.
Me too.
Anyone object?
No?
No.
Oh. And Mary, I can send you the language from 225 CMR if that's helpful.
Okay, that sounds good.
I was wondering if we couldn't include something just requiring the adherence to all applicable state and federal laws regarding hazardous materials. Wouldn't that kind of encompass?
On the hazardous,
Remind them that they have to follow other people's rules too.
Yeah. So John, I'll leave that to you in terms of whether or not that's something that would be appropriate to include.
So are we changing this from hazardous materials to pesticides, or we keeping?
Well, they're pesticides, herbicides, and synthetic fertilizers.
Right. I guess I'm just saying, are we changing the header to pesticides and herbicides? Or are we keeping it hazardous materials and then this could go in there? Or should this be a separate item, maybe item M, where it says the array shall conform. I can't type tonight. All other applicable regulations.
Hey, Mary.
Yep.
I appreciate the idea of having other regulations applicable, but I think for us specifically, we need to make sure that the plans that we get also meet certain regulations. I wouldn't want to leave it to some other area that might interpret it differently than we would.
Meaning, I'm not sure what you're saying here.
So, like, for example, this 225 CMR, it says it's a performance standard for capacity greater than 500 kilowatts, must provide a certification from a professional engineer. And then it lists kind of all the things they have to do.
Oh, okay.
I don't see any harm in relisting it.
Right. But not that it's going to be approved by somebody else and not by our permitting authority.
Exactly.
So John, would this then, if we propose to remove that site plan review, does this requires a special permit and a site plan review? Is that, okay.
That's correct. And I don't know if we would want to explicitly state, maybe not remove this, but change it to say the provisions of Article 20 site plan review shall apply.
Yeah.
Just so it's kind of affirmative.
Yeah, that
could. Yeah, and I think if you look, most zoning bylaws for commercial solar require site plan review and have provisions like that. So it should be, at least that I've seen, so it should be pretty easy to find some example text if you're looking for it.
Right.
Is this sufficient, Brian?
Shall apply. Yeah, it looks fine to me.
It's not beyond what's required of other developments, so it should be good.
Fully consistent.
Okay. So I propose that that John and I work on this. We will send you guys a draft to the whole zoning advisory committee, but we'll also send it to town council for their review, and that we schedule a meeting for approximately a week from now. Is that amenable to everyone?
I love that idea.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Yep. So looking, and this is, I'm saying next week rather than later this week, and that's to give town council enough time to actually review it. So instead of saying 24-hour turnaround.
My best
Well-
friend right now.
How does the 19th or the 20th look?
19th can work for me, 20th it does not.
Okay. Does the 19th work for everyone else?
Is that a Tuesday? I don't have a calendar in front of me.
Tuesday, yes, Tuesday. The day
Yeah.
after Martin Luther King Day.
I think that works for me. Let me just check if I have Concom. I think I have Concom tomorrow.
Yeah, what's on the town calendar? Anything, John?
Yeah, Mary, I'm
So select board,
select.
I have design review board, but I don't think we have any applications and I haven't heard of any applications coming. So that's probably going to get canceled. And then
Okay. If we count on that being canceled,
I'm good for Tuesday. I just checked.
and everybody else can attend this instead of select board, yeah?
Yep.
Okay. Okay, let's say next Tuesday, the 19th at 7. I was gonna say, we probably could see a short one, but I don't want to overpromise.
My alma mater's basketball game starts at 9, so if we could have it done by
Okay.
then, that would be perfect.
Okay, that sounds good. We'll aim for that.
Can I just, I know we're moving forward with this, just play devil's advocate for a minute.
Yep.
As a different approach, if commercial solar was defined as an industrial use, which to me, it's much more of an industrial use rather than a typical real estate development, on par with an asphalt plant or some kind of outdoor manufacturing facility that is not it's an eyesore more than something that is required as in a building. You have an aesthetic review of what it looks like. If it was defined as an industrial use and restricted to industrial zones, it would put the onus on the developer to prove to the town that this is okay to put wherever they want to put it. They would just have to go, add them having to go through the rezoning process, which might somewhat further, make them think twice about what the effort's going to take. And like I say, to me, there's nothing aesthetic about these things. They want to mow down every tree. It's a steel structure with glass panels on it. It's not anything that's going to go through an architectural review, anything that's going to look nice once it's done. Would that be an approach?
I don't think you
could pursue.
I mean, I can't say, I won't guarantee no, but I think that it would be a very difficult reach. I really hear you about the concerns about the impacts of these facilities and why you think they're better suited to industrial. The problem that we run headlong into is that the legislature of the Commonwealth has put this provision in the general laws that treats these facilities sort of specially, and a section about subjects which zoning may not regulate. So they've sort of told us what their policy prerogatives are, if you will, and we really just can't be so restrictive as to these types of facilities. In my opinion, I don't think that a court, it's always possible, but I think you'd have a hard time getting a court to agree with that.
Okay, so our ideal approach is what we're looking at is try to screen it as much as possible to keep the neighbors happy, and maybe look at a tree protection code of some kind to help reduce the impact. Okay, yeah, it never dawned on me till we started talking about it here in this meeting that would be a way to do it, but if it unduly restricts things, then out the window.
Tag on, if I could, really quickly to Curtis's summary, what I think might be possible, and I'm looking forward to Tuesday, My biggest beef with what we've been doing with redrawing the regs is we're accomplishing one of our two goals. We're accomplishing, if they work, protecting neighborhoods from this unsightly development. What we're not doing is saving trees, right? And we had two different goals. I wonder if it's possible to propose both our zoning changes regarding commercial solar, and then as a general bylaw, a save the trees bylaw that only needs 50% vote. And through these two, we achieve both of the goals we started with in trying to control solar development.
Amen.
I thought, didn't general bylaws have to go through the select board?
Yep.
But we can offer it something for them to consider, but yeah.
Yep. Yeah, that's exactly where it would go, but I agree. I think that's a good option. So we'll see. So we'll see what Tuesday brings.
Yeah, I have a homework assignment.
Okay. Yeah, you do. A big one. Okay.
On a very restrictive code, tree preservation code to look at the Village of Libertyville, Illinois.
Yes.
They
I can
required-
send it to you, Brian, or maybe John has it.
They were the bane of my existence. They required a full tree survey for anything over 6 inches diameter at breast height. They had tree replacements specified, or if you took out a 12-inch tree, you had to put in 3 4-inch trees to replace it. I don't think we're looking at anything quite that extreme, but you just hate to see somebody go in and mow down a 24-inch oak.
Oh, I know.
Because they couldn't move their parking lot over just a little bit more.
Okay.
So yeah, I think some kind of tree preservation code would go a long way. I haven't been in Hopkinton that long, but I can't believe we're not protecting trees here with all the beautiful trees that we have.
No, I agree. Thanks, Curtis. So, show of hands, has anyone reviewed the minutes? People reviewed the minutes. Yay!
Yes.
Okay. So, any changes to either set of minutes from anyone? Nope. Okay. So I will entertain a motion to approve. Okay, what's the first date one? Oops.
December 14th.
Okay, December 14th minutes. I'll entertain a motion to approve.
So
So
moved.
moved. Second.
And roll call vote. Ted,
Ted Barker, okay.
Ria,
Aye.
Madhu,
Aye.
Sundar,
Sundar Suraman, yes.
Rachel,
Yes.
Ron,
Aye.
Curtis,
Aye.
and John Coutinho.
Yes.
And Mary Larson Marlowe's a yes. So those are
Who
approved.
seconded that?
Who seconded?
I did.
I think John did.
I did.
Ted moved, John seconded, I thought.
Correct.
Okay. A lot of people seconded it. Okay. And the next date is 12/28. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay.
No.
So I'll entertain a motion to approve the
Wait, a minute,
12/28.
wait. Next date's 12/28.
Yes, 12/28.
Oh, you mean the minutes? I thought you were saying setting up the meeting. I'm saying, oh, wait a minute. We already went through that one. Okay.
Nope.
All right. Sorry.
That's all right. Okay. Motion to approve
I'll
So
move.
moved.
and a second.
Second.
Okay. So I got Curtis and Ron. Okay. Ted,
Barker, okay.
Ria,
Aye.
Madhu,
Aye.
Sundar,
Sundar Suraman, yes.
Rachel,
Yes.
Ron,
Yes.
Curtis,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
and Mary Larson Marlowe is a yes. So those pass. And we will meet again at 7 p.m. next Tuesday, January 19th. And I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
And a second?
Second.
Sundar Suraman, second.
Thank you. Okay. Ted,
Ted, aye.
Ria,
Aye.
Madhu,
Yes.
Sundar,
Sundar Suraman, yes.
Rachel,
Yes.
Ron,
Yes.
Curtis,
Yes.
John. Hi, John. We got video.
Yes.
And Mary is a yes. Video just in time to say goodbye. And thank you all very much
Thank
for
you.
all your dedication to this. And I will see you next Tuesday, but you will be seeing emails from us. So review the wording, okay? Thank you.
Brian, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Brian.
My
you.
pleasure. Anytime you need help, just let me know.
Okay, we'll see you next time.
Brian and Mary,
Yep.
could you stay on so I can coordinate with you guys?
Sure.
So I'm going to try and draft up, Mary, if you could send me any edits you have, or I can take a look at the screening things that you sent. Actually, could you send me the most up-to-date version of your
I
screening?
will, because
I'll try and incorporate that into the document I've got going right now, which is the rewrite.
Good.
And I'll hopefully do that tomorrow, and then I'll send it to you, Brian.
Okay.
Or Mary, would you like me to send it to you first and then?
Yeah,
to Brian?
please do. Please do. Just yep. And then
Would you like me to send it to
even
Brian and
copy Brian so I can just send it back to both of you if I make any changes.
Okay, so would you like me to send it to Brian and copy you, or send it directly to you and copy Brian?
Me
Just
and
so we
copy
know who's
Brian.
supposed to be.
Yep.
I'm sorry.
I'll be primary review it first. Okay.
Perfect.
And then I'll just confirm it back to both of you. I'll also send that particular draft to the rest of the ZAC membership. Okay, so they have something to look at for a few days. Okay.
Brian, any questions for us before we get started on all this?
No, we'll wait to see what you guys give us, and in the meantime, we've got plenty to work on anyway with the tree bylaw idea. So we've got our work.
Sounds good.
All right, thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Bye bye.